Well, good evening, good morning, and good afternoon. We're broadcasting globally, and I have many of you from Australia, which is where this panel's coming from, as well as from New York and Europe and India, all around the world. And the great thing is, all of you can share live. So I am going to introduce you to one of my favorite people ever, Nicole Stephensen. And Nicole heads our Cybersafety Australia, and we'll be making formal announcements about that. She's a privacy professional. She's a mom of two amazing kids who I intend to adopt as soon as she's not looking. Uh, and we walked the beach at my house in Prince Edward Island, Canada, and talked about what we can do to change the world so it would be safer for children. And I knew they would always be in good hands as long as Nicole was around. So, Nicole, thank you so much for agreeing to moderate and run this panel.
Oh, Parry, it's an absolute honor. And I am so impressed with your fortitude right now because I think you must have been awake for about 48 hours straight
Yeah, it's
while
about
you're
48
coordinating.
hours.
Yeah. But what a wonderful opportunity for all of us to come together virtually at a time when we couldn't get together locally to have these same discussions. And it's a credit to you for organizing it and to everybody who has participated so far. I've been watching all of the live sessions and the content is incredible. And I hope that today's panel discussion with my wonderful guests will bring that same level of dialogue and interest that you've had so far.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to bow out and I will let you introduce your incredible guests and I'll take them onto the screen so you can. And good luck.
Thank you. Well, hello, everybody. Coming to you direct from Australia. We're in a bunch of different cities, but we've all come together today online to talk about children and their safety online and the potential for online crimes to be committed against them. Now, I chose, though, to bring our guests together in a way that is a little bit different than Parry has taken so far. I wanted to bring together the people that I know in this industry that I'm incredibly proud to know, and all of whom are offering a level of consultation and debate and policy discussion and influence. And that's something I'm proud to be part of as a professional, but each of them should be very proud to be involved with that as well. Now, I see two of our guests are online now, and we're just missing one. So I'll start by introducing first Brad Flanagan, and Brad comes to you from Deloitte. He's based in the Brisbane practice, and that's my old stomping grounds. And I didn't have the opportunity to know Brad when I was with Deloitte, but I'm delighted to have him involved with us now. He is the National Lead Director for Internet of Things and Operational Technology Security at Deloitte. And what I like about Brad is how incredibly giving of his time he is to talk about security imperatives and the policy discussions that we should be having across a whole variety of sectors, not just relating to children. But from my perspective, Brad's time and attention to the issue of children and their security in online spaces is much appreciated. So hello, Brad.
Hello, Nicole. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for being here. And of course, to my friend and colleague, Colin Anson. Colin is the CEO of a wonderful company called Pixevety, which was founded here in Australia a few years ago. And he's also the former online commercial director for Newscorp. And what Colin brings to the table is this incredible passion for the safety of our children and to make sure that their digital footprints while they're online are minimized to the greatest extent possible. I've had the privilege and the pleasure of knowing Colin for the last few years as he has been growing his company, pixevety, and I'm proud to say that in terms of solutions that are designed to protect kids online, this is one of them. Colin, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me as well. It really is a pleasure.
And finally, to Malcolm Crompton. And look, I'm probably going to get a little bit gushy here because Malcolm is hands down my favorite person in the privacy industry. He became my mentor when I first began in privacy 20 odd years ago and has been exceptionally supportive of me and the privacy movement, both from a policy perspective and also a regulatory perspective throughout his years in the industry. And I can see that Malcolm is kind of bouncing in and out. He's in that part of Australia where our internet connections are poor, despite the protestations of government that they're fantastic. So if Malcolm comes in and out, apologies to all, but I know that he'll reconnect as he can. Now, today's discussion, and as you can see, we've got a variety. Oh, there you are. Hello. Malcolm, I've just finished introducing you and telling the whole world how wonderful you are and what a privilege it is for us to have you on the panel today. I didn't get to mention that you are a former Australian Privacy Commissioner, and you are also the founder of a leading privacy services company called Information Integrity Solutions.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll start now with our panel discussion. I'd like first to please direct my questions to Colin, because I think this is the perfect way to move into the discussion of what's happening with our kids online and what are the pain points and the key policy points that maybe as a collective and a collaborative we should be discussing. Sure. Colin, I really want to talk about this idea of sharenting. And it's a term that we see from time to time in our news media where we're calling out parents and sometimes even grandparents for this sort of prolific posting of videos and images of their kids online. Engaging in their everyday lives, right? And reflecting on my own interactions with parents, whether it's at school or in my family or my friendship circle, it seems that this concept isn't something that everyone's really across yet or alive to. Can you tell me a little bit about sharenting from your perspective? What exactly is it? And do you think that it's a behavior that parents should be reconsidering?
Okay, thanks. Firstly, it is something we should reconsider. By definition, it's the habitual use of social media to share pretty much everything of our children's lives online. And it's really one of the main reasons I started pixevety. I mean, the amount of people that are taking photographs of their own children, sharing it, and then became us, which is, our child sharing that child's life on social media became a big problem. And it's that second stage that I think really drove us forward. It is a poor decision, sharenting, and I think it's one that's generally purely self-serving as it becomes more of a habit and an addiction more than anything else. And please stop me when you want me to, because I can go on for hours about it. But for me, it's not just about the child's parents. It's the teachers, the school marketing departments, it's other caregivers who publish content digitally without a second thought, essentially making the decision not only for themselves, but also the children they're there to protect. Generally, they don't know what they're doing, and it generally comes from a place of well-meaning. But it is a behaviour that needs to change, and it needs to be reconsidered. And I guess it starts here with understanding what the repercussions are. The tech choices we're making as adults need to be looked at more closely. We're making decisions for our children that really aren't aware. We're not aware of what the potential is yet. We're really at the start of it. And it does affect our children's lives. When we were kids, we had anonymity. We could make a mistake, and it wasn't documented everywhere. My mother, I'm sure others did as well, she had the walk of shame, which is what I used to consider. Every school photograph you had, every sporting event, every trophy, no matter how minor, was articulated on the wall, similar to what you've got behind you. That's nice art. We had photographs. So when people used to come and visit, I used to get those photographs and turn them over or generally hide them. The only evidence that were there was the wallpaper was clean behind it. But they were decisions I could make as a child, or I could make for myself. The whole concept of sharenting does come from a good place, but it's taking away that decision, and it's making decisions for others. The decisions they're making to disclose potentially mineable data to tech giants or any technology solution does invade, in my opinion, the traditional areas of privacy and ultimately threatens their opportunities. And going back to having a say in their own identity is at the core of it. I'm really talking about having a safe place where a child or teenager, without interruption, can build themselves into their own values without having thoughts and opinions or everything they've ever done in their lives articulated online. Once it's online, you're not getting it back. I also believe that the term sharenting needs to go back to its original term, which is publishing. There is no such thing as sharing it online. You're literally publishing it. And as I said before, it does come from a good place generally, but the decision to share it does ride the line of negligence if you don't know what the potential risks are behind it, let alone the services we're using and the potential for how they're using that data for commercial gain is something that we're not even looking into. For us, we focus in the schools generally, and we see it, schools doing it just as much as other parents. And it is something I'm passionate about. So, again, I do believe that it really should come back to some sort of moral compass. There are certain things that we do that we learn from that really do need to be in our own personal lives. It doesn't need to be shared all over the place. Those photographs of, the professional photographs of it, I'm using the term professional photograph loosely, back in the 70s and 80s of our school lives really should be left there. I don't really think it's anyone else's business, to be honest with you. And having experienced a few of the issues ourselves from our daughter that has had photographs shared in, again, potentially well-meaning areas, but has really caused significant harm in others. I think this moral compass that we've always had at the core of what we do is something that's lost. Definitely think twice before you just throw any content up online. Don't make decisions for other people. And the ramifications of where that information goes, what information you can garner from that, is just generally not known. And I think in that case, think before you share.
Absolutely. And look, it does bring me back to your idea about the photos on the wall. I remember those highly embarrassing days when friends or a boyfriend would come around to our house, and mom or dad would bring out the photo album.
Yeah.
And there were these cringeworthy moments when there was the bathtub photo of you, or the photo of you with your spaghetti all over your face. But that's a more controlled environment, isn't it? It's a photo album. It's this thing, this tangible thing in our analog lives that can be put away or hidden. It's not something that has sort of prolific level of access. It's not like it's published in a library in multiple copies. It's in hard copy form in your living room. This idea of publishing individual images to a great extent online, on social media, on YouTube, wherever they happen to be, you're right that the extent of that publishing is perhaps greater than the real need of that parent to show off their child or to engage other people in terms of what's happening with their child.
Yeah, agreed. And it's also the data behind that image. Where they are is important. Then you start bringing in unfettered areas of technology and AI that can not only tell you where the child is, are they happy, are they sad, sexual nature, all this information's in an image. And I think that if more people understood that, the less that would. I still think social media has its place, and I think it should be used primarily with 2020 vision, which is probably not going to happen. But really, it starts with us in these groups, having these conversations and making other people aware of what they're physically doing. It is the metadata behind the image that really scares me the most. The embarrassing photograph with the spaghetti all over my face, that happens daily now as I get older. So I'm interested in that, go for your life. But what they can do with that information is probably more of a concern.
What do you think, Brad? What's, from your perspective, where are the risks associated with sharenting?
Yeah, I'll just comment quickly on what you guys are saying, and Colin specifically around, I guess, the intentions of parents these days is not to to put their kids in sort of situations which makes them feel awkward or sort of get bullied or whatever the ramifications of sharing that level of information of their kids online causes. And I think our parents had the best intentions when family members came over and the album came out and the pictures came out. But to your point, Colin, the intention was good. But these days, technology has evolved to a point where I think our parents, including us, right, and I think we're all still grappling with how technology plays a part in our moral compass and the way that we bring our children up, and also how do we become more aware of the risks associated with those, right? And you touched on one of those, Colin, around the data. So where is that data sitting? Do we know when we buy or sign up to an application where that data is going to be stored? And I would encourage everyone to read the terms and conditions, right? And if you do, and you don't click yes, you don't get the application, right? So what do you do as a consumer? How do we bring back the, I guess, not the power, but the authority to the consumer to go, well, I'm not going to buy this product because I don't have any level of assurance that you have security measures in place when developing the application or at least looking after the data. So I think from a risk perspective, Nicole, just back to your question, I think identity theft would have to be something we need to consider. And I think we have traditionally considered or at least associated identity theft with adults and, credit card scams and fraud related activities. These are picked up fairly quickly, but by the banks and by sort of regulatory bodies who have controls in place. But from a child's perspective, how would we know if your child's identity has been sculpted and been used in another country for various forms? I don't know whether we have we would be able to pick that up at this stage. So identity theft, I think, is something we need to start thinking about and considering. And then I guess the obvious one is privacy, and and we touched on that. So your child's social well-being and creating a digital twin of your child online. As you said, Colin, you can never get rid of that, right? So it's always going to be there. So those are probably the two key risks I would call out right now that I think we should really consider.
Thank you, Brad. Now, Malcolm, I know that you've been having a few technical difficulties there. Are you able to answer to the question of sharenting and where you see risks perhaps in relation to privacy? Oh, I think Malcolm is dropping out, guys. That's all right. Look, I think from a privacy perspective particularly, and I know, Colin, you and I have had a number of discussions about this, the idea that children's images are existing in an uncontrolled environment online, and that they may include various details about that child that are details other than just their face, right? Other than that way of identifying them. They may include other things too, like what school they go to or what street they live on, and that presents a lot of issues that perhaps parents aren't alive to. That they're not alive to the fact that there are privacy considerations that child ought to be able to enjoy as they're going about their private life, even though they may not yet be of an age to choose for themselves what's happening to their personal information. We need to be conscious that as parents, when we're responsible for choosing for them up to a certain age, that we need to do that with a degree of care and a degree of diligence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think some of the points that Parry's this whole series has really put kids first has really resonated with me. Is the amount of stories of risk and harm that has been caused. But I think the biggest concern I have, around privacy in these areas is it's not. We grew up with photo albums, as you kind of reminded me of. We grew up in an era when we knew what a cassette tape was. Not only what it was, where to put it, what it did for it. I remember lining up because I'd run out of them. And in that particular era, it was very private. There was no metadata behind that asset, behind the media at all. The fact that I'd watched a video, you couldn't really tell. You had to rewind it and put it back to where it was. It was a much simpler time, I think. And I think the concern I have with the images going everywhere is that it's not just the data, but that particular part of life story, it is about you. And that was you at that time making those mistakes. And those mistakes you make, they form who we are today. Yes. So if we take that away and we remind everybody of every single mistake that they've made, make them daily, right? But if you remind somebody of what they were like with a child, whether they overweight, underweight, they like candy, whatever it is, it's their business. And it's telling a story of who that person is, and we're making the decision on the narrative of that person, right? So that needs to be taken into account. There are certain things that really are personal and private. So that was the whole path of where we were going down. I mean, the whole idea of the photo album was brilliant because it was curated. Someone took a photograph and they put it in context. There wasn't any context anymore other than what I see or the information sitting behind it. And that then influences your child because, hang on, I know you like this, or you do that, or where you go, or why you were that person. It's decisions that we're making without a decent understanding of what we're doing and how we're affecting the children that we don't know yet. We're at the start of this. People think this is the end of it. No, we're at the start of it. If we don't do things about it now, this concept of privacy is dead. It drives me insane. It's only dead if we let it be. You know, you've got the government out there who goes and seeks advice from the big technology providers on what they should do re privacy. What, are we crazy? You know, the hen and the fox in the hen house. But anyway, I'll go on. I'll try and calm down a bit on that. But it does drive me insane.
You know, but you're quite right. You know, this idea, right? And this was a question that I had next, actually. And it was meant to be for Malcolm, but because he seems to be having trouble connecting, which is so frustrating because he would just have the most exceptional information to share with us, I'm sure. This idea that privacy is dead, how much have we heard this bandied about recently, particularly with this headlong move into the digital economy and the fourth industrial revolution, and we're all sort of focused on what's happening digitally, and you have people in key policy positions saying privacy's dead. That's not for us anymore. We're just going to continue moving through the adoption of technologies and the use of data in these digital contexts unfettered. Now, I really take exception to that. As a privacy professional, I do not think it's dead at all. In fact, from a policy perspective, I think we need to be much more alive to community expectations about privacy, particularly when the issues relate to our children, and conscious of what our digital economy means for these young people and what the prolific use of social media means for these young people in terms of what is happening to their personal information at different stages of its life cycle, right? And I don't really know how to get over this issue except to say that I think it's a really dangerous takeaway for children if we are saying privacy is dead. If we're saying that in their interactions with their digital universe that they don't have a say in what happens to their personal information. Do you agree with that? Brad, I'll leave it with you to start.
Yeah, I think it's ludicrous, really. But I mean, if you think about organizations, I'll come to the kids shortly, right? If you think about organizations trying to grapple with privacy, trying to grapple with identity within their own organizations, I would say we're still miles behind where we should be in keeping up with evolution. You mentioned Industry 4.0. I mean, these are all great. You know, they bring great benefits. Organizations are really reaping rewards in many ways, but at the same time, they are not understanding the risks around identity, understanding the risks around privacy, etc. So cascade that down to our children, to a whole nother dimension of individuals who have no say technically around what gets done in terms of their data, what gets shared on behalf of them. Through their parents, so I think it's a significant issue, and I think as I agree with you, Colin. I think we're not even started. I don't think we've even begun on the journey of privacy for and data integrity for kids, right? Let alone organizations and adults.
No, just adding on that, I think I was privileged enough to be around the internet when it was the interweb, when it first really started in this country. And it really was the Wild West. We had no idea what we were doing. And I'm sure the people that created all these big platforms originally didn't have a clue either. It's the ones that came after that then started saying, well, this information, what can we get out of it? How can we commercialize it? Yeah. And I still think that the biggest concern is that privacy is a human right. It's not something, it's not a privilege, it's a right. They thought that in the 40s. So if they thought it was a human right in the 40s, what's it like now? How important is it now? How do we get to this situation? How do we pick up something shiny new? You just give me a bit of information about yourself and I'll let you talk to your friends for free. There is a commercial transaction that not a lot of people are understanding. Oh, so what? I hear all the time, if they know where I am and what I'm doing and what my preferences are and when I'm away from it. I remember the early days of Facebook when people would actually tell you their full name, their complete address and their date of birth. That's the trifecta right there. Then they're silly enough to say, hey, here I am, I'm overseas having a great holiday. Oh, and that's where I live, by the way. That was just minor stuff. So I think a lot of it in terms of this privacy is not dead thing does come down to the tech providers, but that also comes into the legislation and the people to enforce that legislation. We deal with schools all the time and we're dealing with parenting at a commercial level. Our parents want to see all the photos of their children. Well, some do, some don't, for multiple reasons. And I think it does come down to tech providers. They need to be good corporate citizens. The Wild West is over. When we were first rolling out online platforms, we didn't really know what we were doing at the time, but we certainly, obviously, the adoption rate was enormous. But back then, you had to be a good commercial citizen for you to survive next year and people to repurchase the services. For some reason, we've got so used to these tech platforms or social media services that we've actually now got a whole generation of children that see that as the norm. So, Parry was talking about one of the interviews she was doing earlier was all about, sexting. Well, we've actually taught our children that that's okay to use this platform to do these, to share images and share content. They don't really know what the potential risks are until it physically happens to them. I do believe that when making a decision on any technology platform, that especially when relating to one of the greatest at-risk segments we have, which is our educated children, and of course the other, but primarily children, that we need to do some real due diligence on it. We need to make sure that those service providers are actually living up to legal expectations and being held accountable for it. That includes schools, that includes people like us. We have made sure that we have done everything as best we can for privacy by design. Our whole product has been built from go to O on that. And it's something we won't compromise on because we built this to solve a problem that we were having at the time. And I do see that changing. I do see some of the more progressive institutions, especially in the US, which I was kind of surprised at, and in New Zealand. Australia's a little bit behind. But even the leading ones in Australia, they are asking the right questions, which is nice.
Yes, it is. And look, I'll just make a quick note that I think that in the interest of ensuring that everyone here today on the panel, as well as those who are tuning in from around the world, in the interest of ensuring that they get to hear the perspective of Malcolm Crompton, who seems to be dropping in and out. I'm feeling really frustrated for him about his internet connectivity today. And unfortunately, we've all been through that, particularly in our CBD locations. I think that I'll bring this discussion back to Malcolm one-on-one, and we'll do another session so that we all can benefit from his view, particularly from that regulatory and policy space that's so important in our discussions about privacy at the moment. And I know that Malcolm would have a lot to say about the significant risks to our children if we are not including them in the discussions about privacy going forward. Now, Brad, Colin raised the point just now about some of these online technologies and platforms, and I think that that we don't really have to look that far from a security perspective, do we, to see the negative impact of technology on our kids. A classic example would be the hacking of baby monitors, right? Or even CCTV systems that families have installed for very good reasons, being accessible through the internet to people who are interested in those images of our children or in terrorizing our children for their own gratification. And, you know, the interest these people have may be a criminal interest, or it may just be really poor behavior. It may be just about frightening our children. Either way, it's entirely unacceptable. Now, all of us as parents feel that this is an area where we don't really understand the security implications necessarily, and yet we're left feeling insecure and vulnerable as families and for our children. And I just wanted your view on how do we move then from reacting to those behaviors sort of after the fact to being more on the offensive about what do we do about security with our Internet of Things technologies, the uses of these technologies.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just putting it simply, I'd probably look at it from a parents and a consumer perspective, and then on a corporate responsibility. So from a parent and as a user, I think that we have to educate, and I think the onus is on both us as an industry and also as parents. We really need to understand what technologies are we using in our house. So if we are going to get a baby monitor that is recording movement during the evening of your sleeping baby, for example, and that information is getting shared on the cloud, well, where is the data going? Who has access to that, right? How are you comfortable with that? You know, the whole Google Home thing that happened, or you know, recently or a while ago, I suppose now. A lot of people are getting Google Homes, and somebody asked if I had one. I said absolutely not. Like, why would I get one? I'll wait until, you know, at least a couple of years until they've sorted out a whole lot of privacy and data issues. But I guess the concept is really understanding what it is that you are wanting to purchase or install in your home and bringing into your home, and you're bringing in recording devices, you're bringing in eyes, a set of eyes, which you don't know who's behind that lens, right? So I just think there's a piece around education and awareness and the risks around that. So families need to understand that better. But then I also think that there is, and Colin, touching on a point you made earlier, and your organization sounds like it's doing it well, but really following a framework, privacy by design or DevSecOps or something, following a security framework, but not only doing that, but sharing that you do that. So holding yourselves accountable as an organization when you are producing products which are going to be going out to market, right, and be part of a family, essentially. I think, to put it simply, those are probably the two things I would suggest, and I think government really needs to get behind the latter, you know, the second option there, and really start to hone in. We see organizations respond in a cyber sense when the government steps in and says, okay, we've had enough. As a sector, you now need to follow this, or as a industry, you need to follow this standard. We do see, you know, action. Nothing happens unless something significant happens. So I think we're going to need to see movement there.
Right, especially in the comment, nothing happens till something significantly happens. We've been told many times, you know, yes, we know this is an issue, and yes, we know we shouldn't be using social media for absolutely everything we do. We know our consent policies and processes are completely outdated. We know we're going to get in trouble, but really, until something bad happens, I'll worry about it then. We'll tell that family or that child, or the damage that's already been done. I mean, we've experienced it firsthand. And that probably is a reason why we get up in the morning and bang our heads against the wall, because I'm not going to give up on this. I mean, technology has really created a problem that it certainly wasn't intended to do, but it's created something that only technology can now fix. I think the users of the technology must be aware of what they're doing, and that's hard to do. People just, look at all the terms and conditions. It's hard to read. It's hard to find. It's usually in block letters and it's pages and pages of legalese. And they just said, okay, I just want to talk to my grandmother or whatever it's going to be. And I think that you were talking about before about that legislation on the government saying we'll do A, B and C. In my opinion, the governments have said they're going to do A, B and C, but I haven't really seen A, B and C be enforced. And for someone who's put a lot of time, a lot of resources into something to do it the right way and then to be sort of held, not held to account for it, or better still, other services that aren't doing it that way still move ahead because of this apathy. I think the laws need to be enforceable, or they need to be enforced, because regardless, when cars first came out, when motor cars first came out, there wasn't such thing as a windshield, let alone tempered glass or seat belts or air conditioning or seat massages, which I find very important. But all these things weren't there before, and it's only over time that appears. We are at the start of this time, and law has started to catch up, but they have to be held accountable. And people making decisions, or businesses making decisions for across the board on really weak processes, like gaining of consent, true consent, not just tick this box and for the rest of the time you're at this school, we're going to do whatever we want with your content. That's a big problem, and it needs to be looked at. And people know it's a problem, just nothing's happened yet. And the issue I've found, especially in dealing with a lot of schools, is that it has happened and happens regularly, but because of the nature of what's happening, it's a very private issue. It's dealt with privately, and there are gag orders placed on it, so it doesn't get out. That's another concern. So these laws that are out there, or these frameworks that are out there, quite often at the coalface, people don't know. They are completely unaware of, if I take this photograph of little Johnny and I post it on social media, everyone will be so happy about it. What about if little Johnny's parent is making decisions on home loans for an area, or they're just not thinking beyond what they think is acceptable, let alone is what Johnny's doing, really should the rest of the world know that? I think protecting children has to be the primary goal of any service that's delivering a product into anything to do with children. We have to protect them. We have to make sure that every single I is dotted and T is crossed, that we can answer any question and that we're ahead of it. So one thing I noticed in America especially was that the schools of a certain branding level, they don't want to just match that branding level. They want to exceed that branding level. They want to make sure that they provide a service which ensures that brand continues to grow. Whereas I see that a little bit in Australia, and to be fair, but I see a lot of it saying, well, what's the least we can do at all times? So our brand is up at the top, but we're just going to do the barest minimum because frankly, no one cares yet. There is a fundamental difference between level of service and commitment in a lot of schools that I deal with, or that I've spoken to. The ones that we generally deal with really do want to do the right thing, and they are trying to do the right thing. But again, when it gets to the coalface, they themselves are struggling with how do they communicate what is right and what is wrong and what should you be careful of. We spend a lot of our time really educating schools more than anything else. How do you take photographs and publish them? I won't use the word share. How do you publish them in a manner that's going to cause the least amount of risk? Don't show identifiable information. Don't have a photograph of the uniform. Don't say, this is Colin Anson standing in front of the Museum of Sydney, and let alone the data behind it. Take all the data out, strip the metadata out before you post. Now, these are things that just don't happen on an iPhone, but they need to be considered, or put them in a place which are completely private and privacy-centric. Because frankly, photographs of that excursion to the 99% of the population are only of interest to the parents of those children. Why does the rest of the world need to see it? Frankly, they don't care. Most of the time, there's just a whole lot of photos of kids. There's my child. I'm happy. I'll look at that one.
I want to touch just a second on something you said before. You mentioned the word regulation and the enforceability of regulation in this space. And, and then we moved the conversation forward. But I think Malcolm, are you back on the call now, Malcolm? I don't know if he is. I can see him on the screen, but I can't.
Malcolm has been wandering the suburb trying to find a good Wi-Fi spot, a good 4G spot. And like I said, just because I'm on the edge of the CBD of the country's largest city doesn't mean to say we've got good broadband, which is absurd.
Yep.
Although it is actually that is relevant to children, I'd have to say.
Yes.
I've actually not been able to hear almost anything of what anybody has said. So I'm sorry if anything I say overlaps with what other people have said. So perhaps, Nicole, if you want me to say anything, you could frame a question now, and I'll try and comment on it and guess that I'm adding some value and minimally overlapping.
Well, Malcolm, what I would like to do, two parts. Yes, I will frame a question in relation to regulation for you in just a moment. But importantly, I'm going to line up a time with you for us to have a version of this discussion separately, and we will post it through the Cybersafety channel to make sure that this discussion and all of the robust detail that I know you have for us around privacy is properly heard in the context of this panel. So you and I will set that up separately. But in the meantime, what has been a common theme throughout the answers to all of these questions, and I just touched on it just now with Colin, is that there's this idea of regulation in this space of privacy, Internet of Things technologies, what parents should and shouldn't do in relation to the sharing of images online. What we don't have, though, is consistency of a regulatory approach. And where there is a regulatory approach, it's not necessarily enforced to its fullest extent. And this is something that concerns me as a privacy professional. And I thought perhaps this is where we can end today's panel discussion with your views on regulation.
Yep. The first thing I would say, Nicole, is we may actually have enough law already. We actually do have an e-safety commissioner. We do have the Human Rights Commission. We do have consumer protection law in this country. We do have a Privacy Act. There are regulators in each of those spaces. The issue may not be new law. The issue may actually be enforcement of the law. And in particular, even just within the Privacy Act, every company in Australia, with the exception of 1, 2 or 3, very small numbers, have got away with conflating APP1, Australian Privacy Principle 1, with APP5. And APP5 is about the collection notice. APP5 is supposed to be about a specific statement, limited statement, about what you're going to do with the information you're collecting now. Nobody makes a finite promise there. All of the promises are, we will collect everything about you that we can. We will keep it forever, use it for anything and sell it to anybody. Yep. And there has been no enforcement of anything better than that. So the first thing to do is to literally test the law. I reckon the law can be made to work as it stands, that combination of laws that I mentioned before, if the regulators are resourced sufficiently to do that job. We found ASIC in the Royal Commission on Banking getting a thorough beating for not doing its job. But guess who took $100 million out of their appropriations that reduced their ability to do the job? You can guess the answer. The Privacy Commissioner is at least 10 times underfunded to do anything. The Privacy Commissioner is taking Facebook to court now. Let's see if it works. If the law fails, we will have learnt in a practical way the law has failed. But the first thing to do is to test the law. So we've got a huge gap there. The second point I would make is that unlike anything else in the world around us, the world elsewhere has been made safe by standards which are enforced and which usually the person making use of those standards has to pay for. There is a motor car standard. There is a motor car testing body. Manufacturers pay for that process. Only for data, literally, only for data. Is there no self-funded enforcement or compliance process? That will change. It will have to change. So not only do we possibly need better enforcement of the law, we need to change who pays for getting things right. And the motor car analogy is a very good analogy here. For the first 60 years of the life of the motor car got faster and safer. It's just that by the time we got to Ralph Nader, he was able to write a book called Unsafe at Any Speed. Because while commerce, the commercial world, had improved the motor car, the gap between where the market was settling and where society thought the motor car should be, so regulation was needed, and then regulatory enforcement, self-funded by the auto industry, produced a gap closer. We are at that unsafe at any speed moment with data, including with children's data, so that the problem really is not just, no, and it's almost shooting the messenger to say it's the parents' fault. The parents, as we found in the ACCC Digital Platforms Inquiry, along with everybody else, is being consciously, deliberately misled by the platforms as to what's going to happen to the information, let alone any compliance activity, which is why the Facebooks of this world have already shoveled out $5 billion to the Federal Trade Commission in a consent agreement, although Facebook probably just pulled that out of its back pocket. It was nowhere near a big enough fine to hurt Facebook. So we have a long way to go. It's about not so much necessarily redesigning the law as much as making the laws we have work. And this will cost a lot of money, but if data is the new oil, if data is as precious as everybody says it is, we can afford it. Don't tell me it can't be afforded. I hope that helps as a short summary of where I'm coming from on what's going to happen. I'd love to take some questions now that I'm actually on air. And once again, my apologies for terrible connectivity, and it's only going to get worse as we all work from home.
Yes. Now, I'm wondering if Parry, at this point, you would like to jump back in, if you have any questions or final thoughts for our panel, or perhaps I will move then to wrapping up, because I'm just conscious that we're about 5 minutes away from closing time for you.
You are. I am so impressed with this panel. It was wonderful, and I'm taking notes, and I'm actually commenting on Facebook, which I've never done ever. And I was so excited that we could hear Malcolm. I've known Malcolm 20 years at least, and he was always the top thinker, leading edge. And I've recently begun consulting with the IEEE, the Standards Association, and I'm the youth privacy advisor to them. And I would love to do more. Nicole, you're going to have to do it when I'm stuck in the United States. And Malcolm, I love your thinking on this. And we just don't have the big privacy thinkers anymore. We talked about Joe Alhadeff and the horrid loss to privacy in the world with when he died of cancer, but you are one of the greats, and I think that you may be able to, and Colin and Brad and Nicole out of Australia, do what we're not able to do in the United States. So I am thrilled with this, and I know Colin and Brad somehow seem to think that we're more advanced on this stuff in the United States than you are. Wrong. We are not, and I don't know that we terribly care much more, but I'm thrilled with this panel, and I'm sitting there taking notes, which I never do. So I will, Nicole, let you say goodbye to everybody, but thank you so much for putting this together. And you've got to give Malcolm a hug when you're allowed social togetherness.
Absolutely. Like I said, he's one of my favorite people in the entire privacy universe, and so I'll certainly make that happen. Gentlemen, all of you, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules, especially right now as we're all moving from that office work to at-home work, and it's sometimes hard to appreciate what a big effort that is, right? To move into an entirely virtual world when you're used to working a particular way. So I doubly appreciate the time that you've all taken out of your schedules today. The key theme for me moving forward is that we still have a lot of work to do to protect our children, and that it's people like all of us that have the ability to influence the policy debate that's happening in the world now. Thank you all very much, and I look forward to connecting with you all offline.
Thank you, Nicole.
Thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Colin.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Parry.
Thanks, Parry. Bye.
Thanks, Parry.